Hi, everybody. Welcome in once again here to Purple Insider. Matthew Coller, Manny Hill on a Monday night. And Manny, we've got a lot to talk about. I mean, there is nobody like the Minnesota Vikings that can just punch you right in the gut. That you can have this feeling, and I don't know how many times it's happened since I started covering this team, that is just like the whole world has been shifted in one moment. It certainly happened when I first moved here and Teddy Bridgewater got hurt. It happened when Sam Bradford got hurt and Case Keenum went in. It happened in the Minneapolis Miracle. It happened. I mean, there's just so many times along the way where everything that you thought you knew about the Minnesota Vikings, snap of the fingers, and it changed. And that is exactly what happened when Kirk Cousins hobbled off the field with a torn Achilles against the Green Bay Packers amidst playing one of his best games statistically ever, over 90 by PFF, over 90 by ESPN QBR, a really incredible showing in Green Bay. A lot of big plays on third downs, moving the ball up and down the field. A couple of fourth downs, maybe Kevin O'Connell should have gone for, just saying, throughout that game. And then it's over in the snap of the fingers. And of course, we've only got probably hours until they have to make the decision about what they're going to do. So we should start there, and then we'll talk about our main topic, and then you could give your list of Kirk Cousins' top games in Minnesota, which I asked you to put together. But what's your take, Manny, on what you think is going to happen at the quarterback position for the Minnesota Vikings?
Well, I think there's two ways you can kind of look at it. You can look at what I think they should do and what I think they actually will do. I tend to think that they're going to explore some options in the trade market as we get close to the deadline. We're less than 24 hours away, but I think ultimately they're going to end up standing pat and trying to go forward with Jaren Hall, and then if Nick Mullins can come back healthy, he's got the back situation, so that's always kind of tricky because those things can kind of flare up. I kind of feel like if Jaren Hall, starts against Atlanta on Sunday and he doesn't play that well, then we could probably see Nick Mullins for the rest of the season. But if Jaren Hall does play well, there's no real reason to pull him out. At that point, you just roll with the hot hand and you just see where it takes you. It seems like maybe they'll explore maybe bringing in some sort of veteran off the street. Matt Ryan is in the booth right now, and it sounds like he still wants to play. Joe Flacco's name, I think, kind of came up a little bit. I don't think that he really has much of anything left. I'm not really sure Matt Ryan has much of anything left either. So, I mean, they could explore that route, but to me, it just kind of seems like here's an opportunity to get a look at a young quarterback that they took in the 5th round, see if they can maybe find some, I don't know, sprinkle some fairy dust, some Brock Purdy fairy dust on him or something, and maybe he gets hot and plays well out of the blue like Brock Purdy did, and can maybe lead them to the playoffs to one of those last wild card spots. We'll see, but it's a dicey situation. I think that Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell should explore every possible, solution here, every possible option to try and see, because they are kind of in a unique situation where they're playing really well. They've played really well the last couple of weeks, and they're right there in the playoff hunt. You've got some veterans on this team that I don't imagine will take too kindly to you just kind of like throwing in the towel and kind of punting on the season. And I think you kind of want to, if you're Kevin O'Connell, you want to keep winning as many games as you possibly can, because it just looks better on your resume as a head coach. The more winning seasons you have, the more times you make the playoffs, the better it is. It just makes you look better. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think that they should really, try and explore some trade options to get a guy in that can, help them now, help them in the immediate, but also give them an option for the future as well, to kind of play both sides of that coin. I saw you and Dane talk about Mac Jones, brought him up a little bit in the post game yesterday. That's kind of intriguing. Whether or not the Patriots really want to part ways with him at this point kind of remains to be seen. But I think if they're going to pull the trigger on a trade, it would make sense to do something like that, because you bring him in, he's got some experience, he's played well at times, you give him this sort of infrastructure, and it could work. And if he plays well enough, he might be the guy that you have for a couple of years and give you an opportunity to kind of keep this competitive window open.
Kyle says, I'm currently on the Jameis Winston train, but could be talked out of it easily.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll help you on that for being talked out of it. Number one, they're playing the Saints in a couple weeks. So I don't know if the Saints want to help you out. Like he knows their entire offense. And more than the practice squad guy who gets cut and then brought in, like he actually knows their entire offense. And not only that, he's going to be better than Jaren Hall. So why would the Saints in a very tight race want to help you out? And the other thing is too, Jameis Winston has the same career quarterback rating as Nick Mullins. That doesn't mean that they're the same raw talent, but neither one of them has really ever done anything. I mean, Winston won a couple of games in 2021 for the Saints, but has throughout his career been a losing quarterback. The same with Andy Dalton, who's won about a third of his games since he had that short run with Cincinnati, where he was pretty good at the beginning of his career, where he had AJ Green and the best left tackle in football and, all sorts of weapons there, Marvin Jones. And then after that, he hasn't really been any good either. And it's hard to convince me that either one of these guys are much better than Nick Mullins would be, where Mullins had some decent games with San Francisco, probably isn't good enough to get you to the playoffs. And if you spend draft capital on someone who is a middling, mediocre quarterback who has to come in and learn an entire offense and try to win for you right away, and then you go 7-10 or 8-9, I mean, then you just look kind of foolish, right? Like, I guess you gave it a shot, but Andy Dalton couldn't do anything more for you than he could for Dallas when they had him as the starting quarterback and they went like 6-10 in 2020. One of those wins, of course, against the Vikings. But I mean, that's not a quarterback at this point in his career who's going to bring you a whole heck of a lot more than Nick Mullins when he returns. The Jaren Hall thing, I'm mildly interested in. I mean, we got no sort of sample size in the game. He made one good pass to TJ Hawkinson. It was well done, well operated. And that's all we saw. In preseason, he had a decent fourth preseason game against competition that was only slightly better than what we see on Saturdays, a lot of times. So there's no real sample size, even in training camp, where Jaren Hall is only getting a handful of reps because Kirk Cousins is getting all the reps. And then now he's got to go play NFL quarterback. Luckily, it's not against a great team, but it still is going on the road against Atlanta. You get an idea there. What you'd love to have is like a 3-week sample of Jaren Hall to be able to say, can we stick with this or can we move on? But the trade deadline is tomorrow. And then there's no real time for this unless Philip Rivers is packing up the van and bringing all 11 children to Minnesota, and he's on his way right now. And maybe we'll have like the, local TV helicopter over Philip Rivers or, Tom Brady or something. But I mean, that's hard to see. I love that option personally because I just think it would be so thematic to Vikings history to have a random like legendary quarterback show up and then who the heck knows after that. But that's a stretch to be pulling people out of retirement, pulling people out of the booth. Hey, I saw Kurt Warner in the press box the other day, and he looked pretty good. Like, bring Kurt Warner, put him back in. I joked in my article, like, I don't think that Dan Marino or Jim Kelly or Boomer Esiason is available either. So we're talking about bringing in 46-year-old quarterbacks to play a handful of games. It all kind of seems ridiculous, but yeah, you never know. I think that you're right, Manny, that the most obvious thing would to just be ride this out. But it also feels weird because of how they played recently. And how they've played recently is so darn good the last couple of weeks that if you're Kevin O'Connell, you've got to make that argument to the Wilfs. Like, look, if we get someone decent in here, we can make the playoffs. So we're going to have to see what happens there. And we could debate it all day long, but I think we'll know by pretty much tomorrow what's going to happen there. I will not take my daily nap tomorrow because I usually wake up to some huge Vikings news. But there is another part of this discussion. Kevin O'Connell said today that Kirk Cousins will remain around the team and will continue to be in the quarterback room and be a leader on the team. And then he dropped a little one-liner about Cousins thinking about the future and how long it's going to take him to get back, which made me go, oh, okay, interesting. When it first happened, my thought was Kirk Cousins is done as a Viking. Like there's no way he's coming back. They already didn't sign him to an extension. And I have to plug in my laptop, so I'm going to walk around the computer after I ask you this question. But I'll be back. Don't worry. I'm not just leaving because I don't like your answer. Do you think there is a chance that Kirk Cousins returns to the Minnesota Vikings after he recovers next year?
I think there is a chance. I mean, I think even going back to before this injury, I thought that there was, an outside chance that they could, bring him back depending on how this season went. I mean, if they had come back and won the division again and maybe made some noise in the playoffs, I could see how they might, and Kirk has a good productive season again. I could see how they would make that argument of wanting to bring him back on, maybe a more short-term type of deal. Now, injury aside, I think the general thought was that he wanted a much more sort of long-term extension when they were having that conversation in the offseason about, he wanted more like a 4 or 5 year contract extension. They wanted to probably go more like a 2 or maybe a 3 year type of route, more of a shorter term deal. But overall, like I always thought, okay, there's an outside shot that they might, depending on how the season went, they might consider bringing him back. Um, I I don't know. It's hard to read. I think there's a chance they could bring him back, but my question though, caller, is just this is a pretty significant injury. What is he going to look like as a quarterback when he comes back from this? I mean, he's 35 years old. He's going to be 36 next season. How is his body going to respond to this type of injury and trying to recover from it? And also, you know, is he going to be, are we sure he's going to be ready, by training camp next year? I mean, we're halfway through the season now. We're basically at the midway point of the season. And, this is a pretty significant injury. It takes a long time to recover from Achilles. We were talking before we went live here. I mean, we saw Kevin Durant tear his Achilles in the NBA Finals 4 years ago, and then he sat out the entire next season. So, not saying that's going to happen with Kirk Cousins, but I think those are the type of things that they're going to have to consider if they do decide that they want to bring him back for another, on a 1 or 2 year contract for next season. They just have to consider, okay, is he going to be ready to go? Is he going to be the same guy? I mean, you look at Aaron Rodgers having the same injury week 1. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is going to be 40 in December. What is he going to look like when the Jets bring him back? I mean, I think the thought is that he is going to try and come back next year. But what is he going to look like? It's just hard to read. I think about like, okay, what are some previous quarterbacks that we've seen have this injury? Dan Marino comes to mind back in '93. I think that happened in like week 4 or week 5 or something like that. Really, like the first third of the season. And he was able to come back in '94 and played all 16 games and played really well. And the Dolphins were actually one of the better teams in the NFL the year that he came back. So it'll be interesting. And Marino, I think, was only like a year or 2 younger than what Kirk Cousins is right now. So those are the things that they're going to have to consider, if they decide that they want to go that route of bringing him back. I personally think that, at this point, I think you just have to move on, because I think the original plan was that they were going to move on and go with a younger option and maybe sign a veteran in free agency for next year. To me, I feel like that's the route that they have to kind of stick to going forward. And, that's that. I mean, we'll see what they do, though. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for one, they already were concerned about the age issue, and that's why they did not give Cousins a long-term extension, which, by the way, looks pretty smart right now. If we're just keeping a tally on the results from the general manager, it's the best move that he made. Because if he had a 3-year contract right now, you'd be terrified. You'd be like, he just tore his Achilles, and now we don't know what he's going to look like at all in the future. And oh, by the way, he's got guaranteed money or whatever and this long contract. And what do you do now? But instead, because you did not, bend to his agent for the first time ever with this team, then now they can move on if they so please. It makes so much more sense to move on because of what you laid out. I mean, people can talk all they want about Aaron Rodgers and how he's selling this idea he might come back from this injury.
I'm buying
Good
it.
for you. You're throwing passes standing there doing nothing. But quarterbacks have to drive the football from their base, from their right leg. It's a pretty big deal. Like, it's not just the running or the mobility, because Kirk Cousins doesn't have any of that anyway, but it's driving the football. And that's a big deal for Kirk Cousins. This is one of the reasons that he could still put enough juice on the ball. I don't believe that he's ever had a strong arm, and I don't think it's gotten stronger as the years have gone by. I don't see too many balls with him where I'm like, whoa, that was pure arm, and he just whipped it. It's mostly here's how he's driving his right foot into the ground and torquing his body off of that back foot in order to be back to 100%. I mean, that thing's got to be pretty stable for him to play. And trying to guess how long it's going to be right now is really difficult. But what we know is, of all the injuries that can happen to a football player, if you rank them for longest timelines, regardless of improved science, the Achilles one is the longest outside of some career ender, but ACL, or what happened to Teddy, which is a total freak thing where a bunch of different stuff got tore up. But for the most part, Achilles is the one that keeps guys out the longest. And you do not heal the same when you're 36 as if you tore this Achilles when you were like 24 or 22 or something. This is going to be really hard for him. I don't think that's really a bet you can make. I think he wants to come back. I think he loves Minnesota, loves Kevin O'Connell, loves Jefferson. The locker room has totally turned over the last 2 years in very strong favor of Kirk Cousins. When the older leadership moved out and the new leadership came in, these players care a lot about Kirk Cousins. And we saw that yesterday with how heartbroken they were. And I mean, they had seen how well he had played so far this year, but they made the cold hard calculation after last year winning 13 games not to extend him. How would they come back and say, no, actually come back on another contract, even if it's 1 year? Now, maybe they could argue they could draft a quarterback and have him, but I don't know why you would want to hold back the drafted quarterback, because if you bring back Cousins, he's got to be your starter. So it just seems unlikely that that will end up happening. Plus, there's probably going to be a quarterback desperate team that will pay more than the Vikings. And what we learned last offseason, is when Kwesi adofo-mensah sets the price, he's not changing it. And it's gone that way for every player. And so they'll have their price. And I don't think it will change. But I mean, we can't count it out because he's always found a way to come back. But I think that was his last drop back as a Minnesota Viking.
Yeah, it feels like it. And again, I keep going back to, do we know, we just don't know how long it's going to take for him to get back. I mean, maybe there's some sort of a miracle surgery that goes really well and his body heals from it and recovers from it the right way and he's ready to go by training camp in 2024. Maybe. But I just don't know if I mean, we certainly don't know that, and I'm not even sure the Vikings know that. So it's kind of like he's got to have the surgery, and then there's got to be some sort of prognosis on like how long it's going to take him to recover. And then there's still going to be so many questions of just like, what is he going to look like when he comes back? I mean, it's you brought up Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, that was the big reason why they ended up letting Teddy go, because they just didn't they couldn't, everybody loved Teddy. I mean, that the whole locker room, the organization was on the side of Teddy Bridgewater, much like they are with Kirk Cousins today. But the reality was they just weren't sure that Teddy's knee was going to be able to hold up. And to the Vikings' credit, to the leadership at that time, it ended up being the right decision because Teddy, while it's great that he's still in the league and that he's been in the league for almost a decade now, but he's certainly not the same guy as what we saw, back in 2016 in the preseason before he had the devastating injury. So it's just, I think there's just way too many question marks about Kirk's overall future to really go down that route of exploring, giving him a pretty hefty contract with multiple years on it. And like you said, he's going to have to be the starter. He's going to have to play. And we're not even sure if he's going to be ready to play right away at the start of the season.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm trying to pull up the pizza read, but I was also trying to think of a transition into the pizza read for that, but I'm just going to read it because nothing feels appropriate there. Uh, you folks should make Little Caesars the official pizza sponsor of the NFL a part of your game day. Order online during their Pizza pregame 1 hour before NFL games and get ready for football and fun. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza and pick the toppings you crave. You win. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery of their pizza pick portal pickup. So many times of saying the word pizza. So grab some friends and enjoy a few slices during the tastiest hour before kickoff. Pizza, Manny. Here's what I wanted to bring up. So I agree with all that. I think it just has to be a cold calculation of this, even if Kevin O'Connell and Kirk Cousins have become close, even if the locker room cares about him. I think Teddy Bridgewater is a great example. Yes, it was a little more unclear, but when someone is in their late 30s, this goes for the entire NFL. Anytime a team signs a guy that's in their mid 30s, there's always so much excitement because he's a star and they love him and everything else. It goes for running backs like Delvin Cook as well. But it can fall off at any time. And sometimes it's when the guy's playing great and then it's just over. And it's happened to so many players. That's what made the Teddy thing and the Dante Culpepper thing so crazy, is that those guys were not on the older side. But when someone is, you can't make any bets to what they're going to be in the future and when they recover. But here's what I wanted to bring up. Kyle says, who do we think texted Kevin O'Connell? And why would we not believe it? Because Kevin O'Connell said today in his press conference, you wouldn't believe the people who are blowing up my phone over the last 24 hours or whatever since Cousins got injured. And this is a great question for the chat, is who do you think texted Kevin O'Connell? Both serious and unserious answers are welcome. Who do you got? Like who's your serious and unserious person who texted Kevin O'Connell about becoming the quarterback of the Vikings?
Serious one would maybe be Sean McVay, maybe to just kind of like, I don't know, text like some, I don't want to, I feel like condolences are a little bit too, because Kirk didn't die or anything like that, but just to kind of say like, hey, sorry to hear about, losing your starting quarterback, that type of thing. Man, a crazy one. Wow.
I meant for like actual quarterback options. When you said
Oh, okay.
McVay, I thought you meant like to trade them Matt Stafford or something.
Sure. Well, a crazy one would be like, I mean, Tom Brady would be pretty crazy. Just Tom Brady just reaching out saying, "Hey, maybe, hey, why not? Feel like I can still play. My arm still feels pretty good." Although that's more of a Brett Favre thing. Brett Favre thing. Um, yeah, I don't know. That would be interesting. Maybe, I don't know. Would the Patriots inquire about moving Mac Jones? I don't know. I'd be intrigued by that. I would be in favor of that. I'd give up like a third round pick or something for Mac Jones just to see, get a look at him and see if he could fit in. And he's young enough to where, that could be, a multi-year type of situation for you. And you just kind of put him in a situation that's a little bit better than, or well, I guess a lot better than what's going on in New England right now, because that's a train wreck out there in Foxborough. So, yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'd be curious to know who reached out to Kevin O'Connell though. That'd be I'd like to be a fly on the wall in that conversation.
Your serious answer, people hate the idea of Mac Jones, but I keep coming back to how simple life would be for Mac Jones if he had receivers wide open and pass protection. And think about even when he won 10 games as a rookie, their supporting cast was just okay. It was far from great. And he kind of game managed his way to 10 wins. It would also give them something for next year if they drafted a player, which they would still obviously do. They would draft a player, have them there, and if they didn't look good in training camp or they didn't feel like they were ready, or even if they wanted to develop that rookie for a year, they could have Mac Jones still in the mix, and you at least have an answer. I've liked that idea. It's not buying fully into him, but people get very upset when you bring that up, which is weird to me, Manny, because we've seen so many quarterbacks over the history of this team who you would not have thought at all would be good. And then they are with this team because of the receivers and the offensive mind who's running things. And now the offensive line who, is blocking excellently in pretty much every game. That would give him a chance. I'm not sure. I think it's just entirely like results based from what they've seen, that he doesn't do anything super spectacular. And that's been the MO since he came out, as well. He doesn't have a big arm. He's not a great athlete. Why do I want that? And the results haven't been that good. But I also think, like you saw, there's so many examples of this. There's some extreme ones though, like Nick Foles steps into a team and starts winning games with the Philadelphia Eagles, or Jeff George had a pretty terrible career and then comes in with the Vikings, starts launching balls to Randy Moss, and all of a sudden he's a good quarterback. And most recently, depending on your age, that guy who threw the Minneapolis Miracle, go check his stats before he got here. Look at his stats here. Look at his stats after here. And why is that? That's because he had great receivers. And I think there would be a chance to make the playoffs with him. And then at very least have an in case of emergency, in case you got screwed out of quarterbacks in the draft, or in case your rookie quarterback wasn't ready. I don't mind that, but you mentioned the price matters a lot. So I could see like Bill Belichick showing up on his phone and O'Connell being like, Bill Belichick, like, wow, okay, that's interesting. I have about 100 funny answers, like Kellen Mond, just be like, bring me back. Like, I know the offense. There's people have mentioned Kyle Sloter. That's a very common name that still gets brought up. So I don't know. There's lots of funny names. I mean, Stan Humphries, someone said yesterday, and I almost started laughing hysterically while doing a very serious podcast when someone said that. He did lead a team to a Super Bowl. So, yeah, Colin Kaepernick, Tom Brady, RG3, Brett Favre. All these are good names. Uncle Rico. Oh, actually, I thought of this one, and I started laughing when I thought of this one. Donovan McNabb. That is the funniest answer. The funniest answer by far is Donovan McNabb, I think.
Yeah,
Shane
boy.
Falco. Yeah, you guys are really in your bag now with Shane Falco. Mike White
Willie Beeman.
continues to get brought up.
Since we're going the route of movies, Willie Beeman, why not?
Oh, well, I mean, you're winning
He's
a
mobile.
championship with Willie Beeman. Yeah.
Yeah, he's mobile. He can run around and extend plays. Good athlete.
The Kyler Murray thing's not going to be a thing. It looks like Arizona's just going to stick with Kyler Murray, doesn't it?
It kind of feels that way. Like, I mean, and I think if you're them, why not? I mean, give him an opportunity to have a full, well, it wouldn't be a full season this year, but just to get some more reps with Gannon there as the head coach out there, because Cliff Kingsbury was just such a disaster of a head coach, and that might have had to do with some of the lack of success that or some of the struggles that Kyler Murray had late during that time. So if you're Arizona, I don't think you're in a huge, especially if we're hearing things like Caleb Williams might not want to play for you, and I don't know how much of that is actually true, but if you're hearing stuff like that, maybe if you're Arizona, you want to stick it out with Kyler Murray, who's still young, who still has a lot of upside, a lot of talent. I mean, they've paid him that hefty contract already, so you might as well, give it a go for a couple more years, or maybe at least one more year, to kind of see if you can get that turnaround. Because, just a couple of years ago with Cliff Kingsbury as the head coach, Kyler Murray was playing really well, and that team was pretty good, and they kind of fizzled down the stretch. But I mean, I think he's still young, and there's still a lot of upside there. I think it would be wise for Arizona to kind of see how that plays out.
Contract for him is a tough element of that. Arizona, if they play him though, are probably going to play themselves out of that number one pick and then not get Caleb Williams or maybe even not get Drake May because it's a scrappy team that has terrible quarterback play. If they improve their quarterback play, they might be able to win 3-4 games. And I know Carolina just got a win. I don't see Carolina winning a ton of games. Bryce Young played well though, which, you like to see him bounce back from it looking so hideous earlier this year for Bryce Young. But that team is still in line to give Chicago an extremely high draft pick, and Arizona might play their way out of it, or Arizona might be showcasing Kyler Murray. Like, look, he's back. He's good. Why don't you guys trade, several first-round picks for him, eh? Because if you trade him right now, then Kyler Murray has almost no value. If Kyler Murray comes back and he wins a couple games and he looks really good and his knee's good to go and he's still just every bit as quick and he's getting along with the team and showing any sort of leadership in a tough season, they can up that price. I've still been intrigued by it for the Vikings. But again, every time you bring up Kyler Murray, people remember the last thing that they saw, which was it not going well as that team completely fell apart. Their GM was a disaster. Their coach was a disaster, who, by the way, nobody hired and now is some sort of assistant for a not good college program at USC. And we're also seeing Caleb Williams play his worst football there. I don't know. It's not Cliff Kingsbury's fault. I just don't think he was really an NFL head coach. And Murray spent the entire time with him. But go look up, as you mentioned, 2021. That idea has always rested with me kind of as under the like, I'm really intrigued. And if you're going to have something fail, have it fail with one of the most exciting quarterbacks, exciting receiving cores, good offensive lines, good offensive mind head coach. I don't know. Whoever comes in here gets the best situation in the dang league. So I always take whatever I've already seen and then I up it because I'm telling you, if Kirk Cousins is playing for the Arizona Cardinals, it's not going to look good. Or if he's playing for the Patriots, it's not going to look good. He's better than, someone like Mac Jones. I mean, he's probably better than what we've seen at times from Kyler Murray, but situation matters so much. We see this all the time. So Tim asks, why are we suddenly acting like we've lost the greatest quarterback of all time? Well, I was acting that way, definitely. He has one playoff win. That's true. It's never been brought up on the show, so that is true. I'm just picking on you, Tim. And we know who Kirk is, and it's not enough. Anyone adds more intrigue. Well, not anyone. Colt McCoy doesn't add more intrigue than Kirk Cousins. But to your point, the reason why we are acting this way is because as information changes, opinions change. When they were 0-3, if they lost Kirk Cousins, you'd be like, all right, well, tank to glory. Here's Drake May. Ooh, look, he threw another great pass. Retweet, right? But they have won 4 out of their last 5. They beat the 49ers in a big stage. And then they did not just beat the Packers, they whipped the Packers. And Cousins was playing, I think, over the last several games, but maybe even the accumulation of this year, the best looking football he has played as a Viking. There have been games where he looked like he was going to have one of those Kirk days early on, and then he didn't. And there were times where going to Green Bay, in the past, Manny, I might have said, Kenny Clark plays for that team. Kirk's going to freak out and get strip sacked 3 times. He didn't. He played one of his best games. He was so comfortable with this offense that he was pulling puppet strings. And what we've always said about Cousins is if you had everything, then there's a chance to win a lot of football games. And he's never been closer to having everything on the offensive side than he is right now with Jefferson coming back. So to have that happen, and no, I don't think he was going to change, but circumstances change. They're blocking people. That matters. The receivers are better than they were last year when Adam Thielen was here. That matters. The line is better. That matters. And his connection with O'Connell matters. And also the schedule matters, that they're playing. They don't play an above 500 team, Manny, until December 17th. That's a long time from now. It was all laid out. That's why. No one says he's Joe Montana, but the season was just getting exciting. And then it was taken away from you. That's why everyone's upset.
Yeah, and it was just so sudden. And the fact that they were playing well in that game yesterday. Like you said, they were kicking the crap out of the Packers, and then that injury just happened, and it's like, oh my god, it was just like the shock factor, I think, too, of that injury. And by the way, this is a quarterback that, for all of the criticisms that I've had of Kirk Cousins over the last 5.5, 6 years, staying healthy has never been one of those criticisms because he's always been healthy. The guy never gets injured. And so for that to kind of happen the way it did under those circumstances, it was, I think, just the overall shock value of that happening, I think, is a big part of this too. And like you said, he was playing really well, playing some of the best football of his career. And the team had just come off this big win against the Niners last week, and then they're beating the division rival, getting themselves right back into the conversation. And like you said, with the schedule, what happens if this was kind of the start of, a really impressive 5 or 6 game winning streak, and now all of a sudden you look up and they're like 7-4, and they're right there in the conversation. Maybe Detroit loses a couple games. I mean, we were kind of uh mildly joking about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about, like, well, what's Kevin O'Connell going to say at the trade deadline? We're still, hey, the Lions might lose a game or two, and we might be right there for the division. Now you look at the way they played over the last couple of weeks and the schedule ahead. You run off 5 or 6 games in a row, you're right there neck and neck with the Lions, possibly, to still win the division, and that's a big deal too. So yeah, I mean, there is kind of that, like, how was this going to turn out, if Kirk Cousins had been able to stay healthy, stay on this roll. It would have been, I'm gonna be curious to that, I'm just gonna take it to my grave, kind of just like always wondering, like, how would this season have turned out if Kirk Cousins hadn't gotten injured?
You've also got a list we need to get to, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, it is important to remind you that you guys can join me in Las Vegas. And as soon as I scroll up to find that read, oh, yes, there it is. We're going to Las Vegas in December. Doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. I will be there at Circa in Las Vegas in December for the football game, obviously. So if you want to escape the Minnesota weather, which has already turned not so nice, come join me at Circa in Las Vegas. We'll be hanging out there doing the podcast for a couple days leading up to the game when Minnesota's there. And you'll be able to find me at Stadium Swim, which you've never heard of it. Just Google it. Just look at it. It's incredible. It's a giant, humongous screen that, however big you're imagining it, it's bigger. And you could spend time outside. They've got heated pools, even if it's a little bit on the cooler side, but 70 will still feel like 90 to you. But literally one of the most awesome places on earth. We're going to be there the Friday night before the game for a special party just for Minnesota fans that includes drink specials, and they will give away 2 tickets if you don't already have them before the game. So come meet me there at the Overhang Bar in Circa. If you have to RSVP for the party, so go to circalasvegas.com where it says sportsbook, click where it says huddle up at Overhang, and you can RSVP there. Make a whole weekend of it. That's what I'm doing at Circa, located on the amazing Fremont Street. Again, a must-see place if you've never been there, and have a great getaway from the Minnesota weather. Again, circalasvegas.com for details. Book your spot there today. And I wanted to add real quick that Kirk Cousins statistically was having one heck of a season. I mean, 103.8 quarterback rating at the top of the PFF rankings, ESPN's QBR. He was up in the top 10, and I'm sure it went up after yesterday. We have to always judge these things by what's happening and what we're seeing, and not just, and this happens all the time in sports because of the, I don't know, Skip Baylessification of sports, where you decide that you're going to be anti-LeBron when he's 21 years old. And then no matter how many championships he has or established himself as the greatest player ever, when he's 37, you're like, LeBron stinks. Like, but that's not how it works for normal people. I think we move with the information. When you're 0-3, it's like, this ain't working. But then when you're 4-4 and you're now moving up that scoring list and everything else, we're going to evaluate it differently. And when you're playing this type of football, we're going to evaluate it differently. And it had the potential to be his best year as a Viking. And like you said, a lot of people are going to be thinking about this for a long time of he was finally kind of having that year. Even last year was wonky and he had to win at the end all the time. He was having that year and then it was taken away. And that's terrible. And that is terrible for him. And so amazingly, we can criticize Cousins through his time here because he's the quarterback of the football team. And we can be harsh about that based on the decision that they made to bring him in and take him to the next level, which he did not do. So we can criticize that harshly, but also always be evaluating what's happening in the moment and not try to take away from a guy when he just played one of his best games. That's all. But I mean, what Cousins turned into is what every quarterback turns into. A lot of Vikings fans think that they're unique, but I follow a lot of writers from other teams, and the Bears fans spent all summer fighting over Justin Fields. Are you a Fields believer, a Fields hater? And it's very boring. The same thing with the Cousins thing. That's one of the things I'll remember is how boring and silly all of that was from people who were deciding to be haters or believers. It was just like, okay, like we're grown up enough to be more nuanced about sports at this point in our lives, so we don't really have to act that way. But some people do. Anyway, Kirk Cousins has played a lot of great games in the NFL, and he's played a lot of great games with the Vikings. So I gave you the task to rank the top 5 games, and hopefully Kirk will watch and this will make him feel better. How about that? In his recovery, his top 5 games as Minnesota Vikings quarterback. So count us down, Manny. Do your best.
All right. I'll start with number 5 and then obviously count down to number 1. Number 5, I'm going to go with last week against the San Francisco 49ers. Kirk played really well. I think when you consider that the way he's played the last couple of weeks without Justin Jefferson and, opening things up now for Jordan Addison to really emerge. TJ Hawkinson is playing better. And I think that really allowed for Kirk Cousins to settle in and play really well. I thought he was excellent against the 49ers. That's a really good team that is contending for a Super Bowl this year with a rock star defense with just mean, nasty monsters on that defensive front that were going to try and get pressure on Kirk Cousins. And he stood in there. He went through his progressions really well. He got rid of the ball. There weren't really very many instances where he was holding on to the ball too long, which has always kind of been a criticism of Kirk Cousins. And it was kind of the same thing yesterday in Green Bay too, before he got hurt. I just thought he played really, really, really well. So that's number 5. Number 4.
Hey, can you just allow me to comment on them before
Sure.
you go all the way down the list? Because I actually agree with you that was one of his best games. And I wrote about the game and how he was still self-critical and how I've just always been fascinated by this with Kirk Cousins, that he was criticizing the throw to Jordan Addison. That was the one where I wanted to give him so much credit because he had to just fling it up there to his guy. And he did that. And he was playing so confidently, even in the face of the rush, like believing in his pocket and not getting skittish as we've seen before. And one of the things that's always agitated me is that they bang that Monday Night Football drum, his record on Monday Night Football and this and this and this. It's like, well, he might have played a Monday Night Football game in like 2013. I don't know what this has to do with today. And that's also been dispelled a number of times with Monday night wins by the Vikings since he's been here. And it's probably like 3-3 or something since he's been here. But that's not the point. I looked this up once. I tried to make something of it. There's nothing there. And so to do it on Monday Night Football, despite that whole thing that keeps coming up over and over again, it added extra layers to it. The primetime Kirk, if he doesn't play at noon, it's this and that and the other thing. So there was all those forces pushing against them. And he played that game. It was the 10th most yards he's ever thrown for in his career as well. So I think it's a great pick. It's not prisoner of the moment. It was a great game from him. All right, number 4.
Number 4 is 2021, week 11. And this was a game that when we were talking about the Packers last week, great Vikings-Packers games that you've covered in your career. This is one that I thought of, the 34-31 win at US Bank Stadium over the Packers in 2021. It was such a wild game, a kind of a crazy finish. The Packers and Vikings are kind of going back and forth. And Kirk Cousins stood in there, and he made some big time throws. The touchdown to Justin Jefferson was really clutch to give the Vikings the lead to put them back up, and then Greg Joseph had the field goal at the end as time expired to win that game. But Kirk played really well that game. Unfortunately, that season didn't finish well. That was the last year under Mike Zimmer, and the season kind of ended with a thud. But Kirk played really well that game against a really good Packers team. Packers team that was supposed to go to the Super Bowl, and with Aaron Rodgers being the MVP of the league that year. So 2021 Week 11, 34-31 Vikings win over the Packers is number 4.
That was a great game in general. The thing about that game was that there were so many distractions for that season. I have less recollection for some of those 2021 games than almost any other season because we had the Everson Griffin thing, the Dalvin Cook thing, the Zimmer kind of versus everybody as it was slipping out of his hands. But that one specifically, there's the throw to Adam Thielen where the ball looks like it's going to kind of get picked off and then he catches it and runs it. But one of the things about Cousins that always amazes me is no matter what is going on, he would just put the horse blinders on and go play. And at that point, the world was collapsing. We're talking about firing the coaches and everything else. And there was the headbutting between he and Zimmer. And there were a number of games, including, I think it was the Lions game where he had to come back and they kicked the game winning field goal and then he shook Mike Zimmer, where he kind of had a little bit of a fight in him. And that was one of them because that's certainly one where when Rodgers is striking back and striking back and striking back, it's easy to give up on that one or to have that 3 and out or whatever, as opposed to the game winning drive. That's a good pick. That was one of his better games.
Number 3, this one's kind of a weird one because the Vikings did not win the game, but I'm going to go with Week 3, Thursday night in Los Angeles in 2018 against Sean McVay and the high-powered Rams offense that obviously went on to the Super Bowl that year with Jared Goff and Todd Gurley and those guys. That was, especially, it was the first year with Kirk Cousins, and it was a primetime game. Everybody in the country is watching, and I'm watching Kirk Cousins and this Vikings offense go toe-to-toe with the best offense in football. They're just trading blows, and unfortunately, it was a strip sack on the last possession. The Vikings are driving for the tying score, and then I forget who it was that came off the edge and hit Kirk from behind and knocked the ball out, and the game was over at that point. But we were watching Kirk make some big-time throws to Stephon Diggs, to Adam Thielen, and then who was the other receiver that they had got that caught like a touchdown? I'm drawing a
the guy who only caught touchdowns, which was Aldrick Robinson.
Aldrick
That
Robinson.
Was,
yes.
Yep. What sullied that game, unfortunately, was the ending. And then there was some sort of debate between he and John DeFilippo of how many yards he was supposed to drop back in the pocket. And we knew at that point, all right, this DeFilippo thing is a little weird. Like something's going on there behind the scenes that's not quite right when these two in press conferences can't even decide how far he was supposed to drop back. And then after the game, we asked like what happened on that play, and he said, "Well, what do you think happened or whatever?" Like there's been an attitude change, I think, for Cousins, and this might be because of Mike Zimmer not being here, but I'm not so sure it's entirely that. Maybe just maturing in the role or being more comfortable or whatever at the way that he talks publicly and the accountability factor and everything else. Because you and I, we used to talk a lot about how in that locker room they would feel like Cousins was an independent contractor and not that he had just signed the, whatever. And I think over the last 2 years, he's really galvanized the locker room in part because of O'Connell, in part because of winning, in part because a lot of the old leadership left and he was able to become truly the leader of the team. And it wasn't Kendrick's team anymore. And it wasn't, whoever else's, it was his. And that mattered. But early on, that kind of made that one like, oh man, Kirk, really with the ending? But he played a tremendous game, lit up the scoreboard and, battled back and forth. If they had gotten any sort of stop, they probably win that game.
So number 2, I'm going to go 2022, Week 10, Vikings win 33-30 in overtime over the Buffalo Bills, and just a wild, crazy, incredible game. Justin Jefferson makes the catch of the century on, I think, what was it? Was it 4th and 16 or 4th and 18 or something like that? It was some weird.
18. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I mean, that was the ball game right there. If Jefferson doesn't make that catch, the Vikings lose that game. And I give Kirk a lot of credit for that game because, when they were down 20, I think it was 27-10 in the third quarter. I mean, that there were a lot of times where we saw Kirk Cousins when that team got down big, it was kind of like the game was kind of over, and then he'd pick up some garbage yards or whatever, and its stat line would look pretty good, and the Vikings still lost. But the fact that they got back into that game and made it a game again and ended up winning it, and he was making some really terrific throws, particularly late in the fourth quarter, to kind of propel them to that win, was really impressive. And it was just a fun game. It was just a wild game. Now, the game that proceeded to happen after that the next week kind of took the wind out of the sails a little bit, but it was a huge moment for them to win that game against a really good team on the road, and it moved them to 8-1. And there was that thought, like, okay, this team might be serious about going on a deep run. This might be a serious thing. So just a really impressive game for Kirk Cousins to kind of overcome that deep deficit and get them back into that game and eventually winning it.
And that's one, of course, being my hometown as well, that I will never forget having been there for that game. Another one where you want to give him credit for just heaving the ball up to Justin Jefferson, as it was always a critique about his game, but he certainly did it in that moment. That game, you're right, they got down and he did not play well early on, but the amount of resilience required, like you could say that against, okay, so there's a game against Denver that someone brought up where stat line's amazing and they had to come back and win, and Brandon Allen's the other quarterback. They were at home, they got down by 20, and I'm like, I don't know, good, I mean, good for you, whatever. It was snowing in Buffalo. That defense is good. That defensive mind who runs that team is good. That's one where it is about as easy as it comes to pack it in. That team was being talked about for the Super Bowl. You're down whatever number of points. I remember in my article about the game writing about their win percentage being like 5% or 3%. I mean, if there was ever a time to just start checking down, that was it. And that was where it started to shift truly with Cousins. That feeling, I think, within the fan base, because there wasn't the 23 play drive of checkdowns that ran the clock out on himself to make sure the completion percentage was high. He was making plays. He had a run in that game that was pretty impressive where he kind of put his head down. So that's a great pick. Absolutely one that I would include.
And number one is going back to the Mike Zimmer era, 2019 NFC wild card, Vikings 26-20 over the New Orleans Saints. The touchdown to Kyle Rudolph to win it in overtime. Just stat line for Kirk, not great in that game, but I think just the toughness of, overcoming sort of that crowd. It's such a difficult environment to go down in New Orleans and win against that team, Drew Brees and Sean Payton and Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, that high powered offense, to go down there when, so many things happening going on, behind the scenes with the Vikings leading up to that game. It's like, if they lose this game, is Mike Zimmer going to be fired? Is he going to go coach the Cowboys? Like, all of this stuff just kind of circulating. And I remember that. And to go on the road, make the big throw to Thielen to set up the Kyle Rudolph touchdown in overtime. And it was Kirk's first playoff win, and his only one to date, by the way. But still just an overall impressive performance when you're not really getting along with the head coach. The head coach very clearly wants to, conduct his offense around Dalvin Cook, and Dalvin Cook not really having a super productive day in terms of like yards per carry. I think he only averaged like 3.5 yards per carry that game, but the Zimmer wanted to keep feeding Dalvin in that game. And you're watching and just like, No, you got to let Kirk Cousins throw the football. You've got Thielen, you've got Diggs, you've got Kyle Rudolph. Open up the offense a little bit, and when they did, Kirk made some throws, and they got a win against a really good Saints team on the road in a really tough environment. So that's number one.
I think that's the only pick for number one because he was big in the biggest moment there that they had with him as a Viking. And I don't disagree that when anybody talks about the Kirk Cousins era in Minnesota as a team, like, did it work? Was it a success? The answer cannot be yes, because you did not get to where you set the bar of where you were supposed to go. And now that they're going to miss the playoffs potentially, if they have Jaron Hall in or whatever, I mean, you're going to talk about 6 years as a franchise with 2 trips to the playoffs, and he leaves you at 4-4 and not 8-0. So it's not like you could just get there. Now you're playing a bunch of other teams with questions about their quarterbacks, but you're in the same boat, at least until Tom Brady shows up. And then, yeah, the accumulation of the whole thing was not a success. And I agree with what Tim is saying in the comments that if you had to guess how this thing was going to play out over this year, you can lay it out. You can say that they weren't going to be strong enough as a whole to either get to the playoffs or get through, or eventually that was going to run out. It's like when a basketball team gets down by 30 and then they cut it to 9, and the announcers will be like, what resilience? They cut it to 9. And then it'll be like a 20-point win at the end because they run out of gas. Like they just, and that could happen. That could have happened that at the end of the year, when you play Cincinnati, Detroit twice, you could have run out of gas and gone 8-9. And that's not an unlikely scenario based on what we've seen in the past. You can say that and also say the way they're playing right now is the best football they've played, weirdly better than at almost any point last year. It is the best football they've played probably since 2019 over this winning streak. I wanted to see how it was going to play out. I wanted to see how the whole thing was going to go. I didn't want this to happen. Nobody wanted this to happen. And he's played so well over the last few weeks that it's been better than at many times in his career, and his comfort was there and his accuracy was there and everything was clicking for them, the locker room coming together. It's a terrible time for this to happen. And I think you can say both of those things. I would like to nominate one other game for your list, by the way.
Mhm.
Philadelphia 2019 Vikings win 38-20. Kirk goes 22 for 29, 4 touchdowns, 138 quarterback rating in the game. Stephon Diggs just roasting people in disturbing ways during that game, pushing the ball down the field, the play action. Stefanski was in his bag that game, deep crossing routes, bootlegs, all sorts of things happening. That was an incredible game, and that was a team that did make the playoffs, had a good defense, had a good defensive line, and they end up making it. So a great list, though. That was pretty much it for me. Like nominations that belong in the top 5. I thought you absolutely nailed it. There's a couple other that are like he beat Detroit 42 to something. Matt Patricia was the coach. Like, I don't know. It's like that's great, but it doesn't belong in that upper echelon. So we'll see, Manny. We'll see what happens with Kirk Cousins here going in the future. If it's Jaron Hall the rest of the season, and then we're trying to figure out what's going to be next for you each week. Selfishly, if they brought in Matt Ryan or something, it adds a lot more juice to the rest of the season. That's all I can say. I mean, like, there's a, I don't think it's irrational to want that, but there's just a part of me that wants to talk about that instead of each week going like, is it going to be Mannion or Mullins or Hall this week? Or maybe Jaron Hall will surprise us. It's the Vikings. You never really do know. So great list, Manny. And do you want to put down the prediction before we close it out? Because we'll know by tomorrow what's going to happen. So you might as well throw down the prediction.
Uh, I think nothing's gonna happen. I think we're gonna get to the end of the deadline tomorrow, and it's gonna be Jaron Hall set to start on Sunday, and then Nick Mullins or Sean Mannion will end up being the backup, and we might end up seeing Nick Mullins or something play at some point this season. That it All of the other stuff seems exciting, and I would be all for it no matter what they do, really. But it just kind of seems like they're going to stand pat with what they got and just see what they can get out of Jaron Hall.
I will make a very hot trade deadline prediction. that the Vikings will make a huge trade and send Ezra Cleveland somewhere. That's my guess. I think they're good with Dalton Reisner, who's been a great fit, and they also like Blake Brandel. So they're going to see if they can get something from a desperate team who needs a guard for Ezra Cleveland, and that will conclude all of the happenings at the deadline. But yeah, I don't think Daniil's going anywhere. Maybe they'll do something. I don't know. Maybe I'll just because you said it, I'll put the official prediction in that there is another quarterback here, and I just don't know who. And that's the way I can hedge it so I could try to be right. Thanks for all of your time, Manny. Thanks everybody else for watching, commenting, listening, however else you've engaged with this wonderful product. And we will talk to you all after the trade deadline. We'll see you then. Football